This short video is brought to you by an astute subscriber's comment that jarred my memory of a past repair that I totally memory hold. Deep down inside, I knew that the entire axle and hub assembly could be stabbed right through a rigid steel hole that's smaller than the axle itself. This is supposed to fit through that hole, going that way. Physics don't apply here. Certainly that's worth a short comprehensive video of its own. If you just watched a GSX chassis restoration reboot, then you saw me struggle with separating both of my rear axles from the hubs. One surrendered, but the other one appeared to defeat me. This is actually a common problem with many Mitsubishi models, including the second generation DSMs. The reason that Father Time plays his worst dad joke and welds these parts together is because Mitsubishi uses a thick split lock washer on the end of the axle, between the nut and the hub bearing. That split washer allows any liquid to just have its way with the ferrous hardened steel splines of the axle and hub. They did not grease the axle splines during assembly of any of these cars to keep moisture out, so if you didn't add grease to the splines during prior servicing, then you'll have this problem even with the replacement parts. Grease your axle splines, people. If all of these methods that you saw me doing on the floor with the hammers and nuts, penetrating oil, propane torch, air punches, 2 or 3 jaw pullers, if none of that stuff worked for you, then you're probably not going to ever get them apart. Not after this long, and definitely not with the methods that you saw me performing on the shop floor. These methods should really be all it takes. But if you've done all this and you've resorted to removing the whole assembly to go any further, those parts are already a write-off, and now they're stuck inside a part that you can't find a reasonable replacement for. I swear to you, this is not my listing. This is just the kind of thing that happens once people reach this point. And this is an example of the only possible listing you're ever going to find for a 2G rear knuckle assembly these days. People get desperate over stuff like this. Many of the parts included on this assembly, the way they're being sold here with the brake assembly, they're unobtainium. So if you need them all, how else are you ever going to get them? I'm sure that's why this price is where it is, but all of this could be easily separated and taken apart if you only needed a $700 rear driver's side knuckle that has the exact same problem that I've already demonstrated. And judging by the counter, we're the only 2 people on this planet having this problem right now. While he says all these parts are good, they're almost 30 years old and no doubt need the exact same love that my car is receiving. Minus the tubular rear subframe, of course, but I've got everything else. I hope you get your car fixed, bud. All the stuff with the press. That's what got us here. Not just the axle got destroyed, but the hub bearing probably didn't like 20 tons of thrust load on it either. Bearings and axles are currently available, but the knuckles are not. So the most important part that you can salvage at this point here is the knuckle, and fortunately you still can. I actually had this exact same problem back in 2003 when the car was only 8 years old. I got stuck in my condo's parking lot trying to replace the driver's side front axle, and I paid my cousin Mike to do it for me because I knew my community association wasn't going to have any of it fixing it there. I wasn't the one who did any of it. It was just explained to me over the phone, but I do remember it being at work and ordering all the parts. Front axle, wheel hub bearing assembly, and the ABS sensor that got cooked with the acetylene wrench trying to, and failing to separate them that way. It didn't help anything at all. It actually made it all worse. That's why I didn't go the route that I said I was going to try in the previous video. So, again, thank you for that comment. If you've got a hub assembly like this one, if you've got a 2G Eclipse or a Talon, the Lancer Evo, a 97 to 2004 Galant, basically any Mitsubishi thing that has an internally sealed hub bearing assembly that's bolted into the knuckle, then this video is ultimately how you're going to get your stuck axle out. So here's the one that's already taken apart. And if these 4 bolts are removed, the bearing slides out the front side. That's how it works on a 2G. And I'm here to tell you that somehow this is supposed to fit through that hole, going that way. That's right. That thing is going to go through there. Doesn't seem feasible. 3 other people have looked at it and said, nah, no way. Well, let's take these to the bench. I don't blame them for saying that. I mean, at a glance, there's absolutely no reason why you should believe that that should fit through that hole. But if we measure it to the other edge, 82 millimeters. We'll just lock that one in. If I were to try to measure this axle, oh no. Well, there's the actual hub, and it looks like I've got half a centimeter to almost a whole centimeter of clearance. So all I gotta do is cut this band clamp, pull the boot back. The only reason I'm gonna do it that way is to try to save the boot. I mean, why spend $10? I've got a drawer full of these band clamps. But we'll cut that off and unbolt the bearing and just take that sucker right on out. There's lots of ways to cut these clamps, but naturally I'm using the struggle method. And that's where you're working in a tight space, trying not to destroy things. Or specifically trying to destroy only one thing. I mean, I know why people cut the boots, but no. Now, glove up. I'm going to get a hook for this. After cutting the clamps, using a hook takes all the struggle right out of the struggle method. Once you've used these hooks, you won't approach old rubber parts without them. And now you get to watch me recall my axle knowledge because it's been a long time since I've had to mess with these things. I've typically opted for replacement. It's a messy, time-consuming job to rebuild an axle whose parts collectively cost enough to justify saving your efforts in replacing the whole thing. Oh, I still got that guy on there. I'll probably have to separate. Yeah, I got to separate this. Been a while. I'm not going to cover rebuilding the whole axle, just how to get the seized part out of the knuckle. And yes, I understand the value of having a nice climate-controlled place to be doing this again 20 years later. Real lightning. Not that fake stuff. Glad I'm not living in a condo with a community association anymore. What was I ever thinking? Paying a monthly fee to people that tell you not to fix your own car where you live. Who do they think they are, the government? There's a snap ring that holds the CV joint's bearings into the axle shaft that needs to go. If you dig around with a pick to orient it where you can get to it, there's two little holes on the snap ring that make it much easier to grab. Most snap ring pliers are terrible, but over the years I've found the Mac Tools versions of them to be the most effective and convenient ones for this job. Once you've popped the ring and slid that thing off, now you can remove both the inner and the outer boots without cutting either of them. And now I've got spares for my next leaky one that I can fix without spending a dime. It's the #1 cause of CV axle joint failures after all. With the boots out of the way, tight fit. I should only have to remove 4 semi-mangled bolts that we were jigging off of on the press to free the bearing, and the whole thing should fit right through the knuckle going the opposite direction from how it was originally installed. We'll turn a one-way hole into a two-way hole, but thanks to the press work, I get to hammer the socket onto the bolt heads. And of course that means I also get to punch the bolts right back out of the socket when I'm done, no biggie. Rinse repeat for the other bolt that I mangled. And at this stage, all that's left is to break the rusty machine-fitted bearing loose from the knuckle with a hammer. The axle joint's toast, and so is the bearing, so what does it matter really? Once you've created enough of a gap on one of the ears of the bearing, go ahead and get your pry bar and skip any further abuse. It all falls apart, and you get all your other valuable and necessary parts back without torches or 20-ton presses. If you need them in the first place, then the parts are already toast. That's how you fix it. Oh, daggone it. Lost my security deposit. Oh well, I'm glad I got that out of the way. Here's how it's supposed to go. Your axle came out already, so there's just 4 bolts to free the wheel bearing. Here you see the flange I pried apart after beating it loose. But since there's no axle in the way, you just lightly press the hub bearing out of the knuckle using a big socket. It's a whole lot less effort if you can easily remove your axles. So grease your splines, people. A half-cent's worth of grease could save you $450 worth of parts later if you did all the work yourself. Now I can harvest the parts I need and move on. I had fun doing this, just to satisfy the last point of why garage floor methods are the only methods that should be required to separate known good parts. Going beyond those methods isn't going to leave you with anything that you're going to be able to reuse anyway. 20 tons is going to destroy the axle shaft. Guaranteed, whether you put the nut on it or not. Same goes for the wheel bearing. Look at this. I'm bending the bar on the 20-ton hydraulic ram right now. Would you put any of this back to use again after that? That's why I said they were a write-off before I ever tried to do any of this to begin with. And it confirms what that commenter also experienced. Never got it apart. And the cause of that eBay listing as well. So save yourself the effort if the garage floor methods don't work. It's a common problem on this platform, and this is how you get out of this jam. You just have to ram the axle that's bigger than the hole right on through it. It's a little messy, sure, but it'll fit. Thank you, Force Rule, for the idea and the wake-up call. I haven't always been the one to work on my own cars. Everybody hit that like button if you're grateful for a Honda guy taking his time to leave a comment to help out this old DSMer and causing another GSX video. Be back soon, so stay tubed.